Hey there everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first novel. And on my channel I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, which is the characters. And the heart of characters is in their psychology. So that's the angle we take in everything we talk about on my channel. So today we are continuing with my Types of Magic series, and I don't have a collaborator this week, but that's okay. So this week we are digging into what I have deemed entrapped magic. Okay, so first and foremost, what is entrapped magic? Entrapped magic is essentially magic that exists through totems, amulets, spells, things like that. It's different in that it's not magic that you directly possess. So you have to have essentially a conduit to reach the power that you want. So like in previous videos, we talked about elemental magic. That is magic the person actually possesses and they are able to manipulate the elements without any additional help. Entrapped magic is putting magic into something or having something essentially be a key to get magic. So this one has a lot of different angles and variables to it that you can use. So I'm going to try to keep it basic because I think you could probably go on and divide this into multiple different types. So we're just going to keep it to the basics here. So most of the time in stories, it's not necessarily that the object or the spell or the book has magic, it's that it is essentially allowing you to channel magic. So a good example would be if the source of magic in your world were a pool, then the spell or amulet or whatever it might be is a funnel that is, or a bucket that is letting you take select amount of magic from that pool and then manipulate it and do what you want with it. So there's actually, I think this one is fun because there's actually most of the time a lot of rules that you can put in with these. Something that seems to be consistent across the board is that the older the magic, the older the language that you need to use to command it. So that's why in a lot of cartoons and movies and books, the person will have to speak one of the ancient languages to use it. A very popular one for us is Latin. I've also seen Greek and I have also seen Hebrew. So basically languages that are associated with having a long history are thought to command more power over the magic because usually the magic is just as old, if not older. So it's worth noting that, like I was talking about regarding language, this scene in Lord of the Rings that I'm playing over for you guys, Saruman is speaking Quenya, and Gandalf is speaking Sindarian. I'm probably saying that wrong, so I apologize right now. But this is relevant because Saruman's magic ends up being the more powerful in this instance, and Quenya is the elder language of the two. So that kind of draws back again to the point I was making about the age of the language being relevant in regards to how powerful the magic is. So you could manipulate it using a modern tongue, but the idea is that if you're using a modern tongue, you're not going to be able to manipulate it as well or as much. So there's that. The other thing that I like is that with entrapped magic, this is the magic that has loopholes. And it's one that I tend to find in numerous mediums that there's usually loopholes in this kind of magic, particularly spells.
Everyone in the city. I didn't know she had this kind of power.
I wouldn't put anything past Demona.
Why wasn't your friend affected?
You have to see and hear magic for it to touch you. A blind man's immune.
So spoken spells or written spells, they usually have a loophole. And the more I think about it, I think the reason behind that, and this is just my interpretation of it, but the reason behind that is that when you are channeling magic that you don't naturally possess, it's a hard thing to command and control. So I think if you were to eliminate all the loopholes, it would essentially be like, let's say you're putting all your magic in a bucket and there's various holes and channels in said bucket. So in order to plug up all those holes, it would take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and sometimes you don't have that available. So a lot of times there's loopholes that people can manipulate or utilize that you usually don't think about, and most of the time people don't take the time to really dig into them. So that's my interpretation of it. There is also the interpretation that, particularly if you're dealing with like a mythical creature that's using this type of magic, it's almost this idea that they almost have to include a loophole because that's how the magic works. There has to be almost an escape clause, I guess. And I've heard various reasons why. The most prominent that I hear is that spoken magic within a spell is what limits it. It's when you actually have to use language to convey a spell, that's what limits it. Which is why in a lot of cases, people that do nonverbal magic, usually those spells are more powerful and have less limitations. So that's another angle to consider. And something I have always found fascinating, that I first saw it in some cartoons when I was a kid, but as I got older, I realized a lot of movies and books actually do this, is that spells are very straightforward. They are very straightforward. If you look at, I'm going to play you guys a clip from Gargoyles because it's the one I have the most accessible. When you look at this spell, listen to the words, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what they mean.
Omnes conspecti, omnes auditi, in nocte usque, ad saxum commutate, dum caelum arceat. Okay, so like I said, they use an ancient language here. They're using Latin. And while some of the spells they use are not entirely correct, and by that I mean the grammar is off, the words for the most part are pretty spot on. So this spell is from City of Stone, which is actually one of my favorite episodes, which is a spell that essentially turns everyone to stone within the city. So what this spell literally, its literal translation is, all who see, all who hear, turn to stone even at night until the skies are fire. So that's incorporating that loophole I talked about. There is a way to undo it, but most of the time the way to undo it seems almost impossible, but it's technically a loophole. Naturally, being the kind of show it is, they find a way to utilize that loophole. But this is something that you see throughout the series, and like I said, through a lot of different mediums, you'll see that the spells will literally tell you, here's what I'm doing, here is what I am conjuring. And I think that makes sense because you're essentially commanding, like I said, magic that you don't own, it's not yours, and you're telling it what to do. So I look at it almost like when you program a computer. You have to tell it exactly what to do because otherwise it's going to go nuts and it's not going to know what to do. So I think that part of spells makes a lot of sense. The other thing about this is that a lot of these spells are very literal minded. And
Again, I'm going to use gargoyles again simply because, like I said, it's what I have most access to. But take a look at this clip. I think you'll see what I mean.
He will obey whoever holds the spell. We can protect him from his naivete until we reach our goals. You fool! Do you think I've come this far just to let you stop me now? Goliath, destroy him! I hold the book. You must obey me.
You hold the book, Demona, but I hold the spell.
So that's actually one of my favorite loopholes of magic that I've seen in almost any medium, which honestly is why I include it here. Because, like I said, it's very literal. And anybody who has worked with computers understands sometimes the computers are extremely literal. They're very much, okay, here's the information you told me to do. Here is literally what I'm going to do. And a lot of times errors pop up because you have to go in and fix little mistakes that you made or clarify something. And I think magic works very similar in that you have to be very precise in what you tell it to do. Again, it's not yours. It's not something that you naturally have. So if we are essentially channeling it to use it, we need to be very precise in what we want it to do. So that is something I really like about Entrapped magic is, like I said, you can use it and give it so many limitations, but you can also, if you know what you're doing, you can make it very powerful because there's almost no limit to the creativity you can do with spells. I mean, if you look at some of the spells that have been in books and movies and stuff, they can do horrific or wonderful things. It just depends on how it's phrased and who's doing it. So this is one, I think, too, it really depends on your magic system, how this is going to affect the user. I've seen movies and books and stories where it really doesn't affect the user at all because it's not their magic, but because of that, they have very limited control over it, which is why the spells have to be so precise. That's a fun angle to take. I've also seen it where the person literally essentially becomes the conduit and it's traveling through them. So the more powerful the spell, the more dangerous the spell. So that's something that you can consider as well. Kind of like with any magic, there's a lot of different angles to take with this one. I personally don't use this type a lot in my stories just because I prefer more natural magic, but I do use it. And I tend to go with a mixture of like an amulet, conduit, and creatures that have a natural affinity for magic. So that's always a fun combo. That's just me though. Everybody has their different preference. So that is essentially Entrapped magic. Like I said, it's not limited to spell books or spells. I chose to focus on those because I think they are the most interesting. There is the case of essentially just having an amulet or some kind of jewelry or pendant or something is essentially acting as a conduit, and you can use that to do whatever it is you're going to do. I tend to think that kind of magic probably takes a little more focus and a little more training because, like I said, you're commanding something that's not yours, and to do it without words, without specific instructions, I think would take a lot more practice. So that's my thoughts on the limitation of an amulet type magic, is that you gotta know what you're doing. With spell type magic, it's almost like you almost have safeties written into the magic. Like, okay, here is the only thing this magic is going to do. So those are just some fun little tidbits to think about. I'm glad you guys stopped in to check out this video. I will have another one next week. I do have some more collaborators that are coming up soon, so we will be looking forward to that. And as always, please leave comments or suggestions below. I always love to check them out. And if you guys like this content, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when I upload. And also, quick announcement, we are now at, I believe 66 subscribers. When we reach 75, I will be having another giveaway. So just a heads up for you guys, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.